We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening, you're with GB News, and we start this bulletin with some breaking news from the other side of the world. From New Zealand, the capital city, Auckland, 2 people have died and multiple people are injured in what police are describing locally as a serious incident. Let's show you live pictures that we're getting from New Zealand, where we believe armed police cordoned off a street near to this construction site that you can see if you're watching on television in the centre of your picture. We understand those 2 people dead, multiple injuries on the scene, and the police tell us as well that the male offender is also deceased. Local media reporting he was shot by police, that not confirmed by them as yet. But armed police still surround the area. Police say the incident has been contained to this building, which was under construction. There's a large armed police presence in the area, and multiple emergency service vehicles, as you can imagine, are on the scene. This is causing some shock and horror, of course, the other side of the world right now. It's the morning. The time in New Zealand is 11 o'clock in the morning. Auckland's mayor described the situation as scary. People have been asked to stay at home and avoid travelling to the city centre. These are live pictures coming to us from New Zealand, so if you're watching on television, forgive, we can't control what is being looked at right now, but you can see in the forefront of your screen the emergency vehicles on scene. Well, you may remember, if you follow the news, New Zealand implemented an assault weapons ban just 6 days after the Christchurch massacre back in 2019. 50,000 New Zealanders handed in their guns. When that happened, the response to this will no doubt be just as robust. But that news just into us. 2 people dead, and the shooter also dead, according to police. Well, in other news today, the Prime Minister says no one should have their bank account closed for exercising their right to free speech. The matter was raised in Prime Minister's questions today by MP David Davis, who described the closure of GB News presenter Nigel Farage's bank account by the exclusive bank Coutts as vindictive, irresponsible, and he said it was undemocratic. Rishi Sunak was asked if the government would need UK banks to inform the Treasury about all the accounts they've closed for non-commercial reasons over the last decade. Coutts responded this evening in a statement to GB News saying it is not Coutts' policy to close customer accounts solely on the basis of legally held political and personal views. Tata, the owner of Jaguar Land Rover, is set to create 4,000 jobs in the UK through a new electric car battery factory. It's expected to be built in Somerset. The Prime Minister says it will also lead to thousands more jobs in the supply chain, although it's understood the factory will be backed by significant subsidies from the government, amounting to hundreds of millions of pounds. Inflation has fallen today, but the Chancellor says the government isn't complacent about the current cost of living and says he understands people are worried about rising costs. Jeremy Hunt was responding to the latest inflation figures, which have fallen faster than expected in the year to June. Inflation now stands at 7.9 as the EU deployed firefighting planes and helicopters across the region. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome to Headliners. I am Simon Evans. Joining me tonight, a boy and his dog. It's Josh Howie and the big dog Nick Dixon. There we are. There's a nice heartwarming frame for the the fireworks that are about to fly. We've got some marvellous news to explore and expose this evening, gentlemen. Let's take a look at the front pages. We kick off with The Telegraph, who are doing God's work on this story. NatWest boss under pressure over Farage bank scandal. That is Nigel, circled there as though by a large graffiti artist for some reason. Express, prices must drop now. Inflation has fallen. That seems to be a diktat rather than an economic forecast. Guardian, Tory MPs fear by-elections could leave government in death throes. Do they, though, really? The Times, banks told to respect free speech. And that, I assume, is more about the Farage bank account. Daily Mail, new law to curb banks that shut down your account. And a Singleton no more, Bridget Jones to wed British hunk. And finally, the Daily Star, complete and utter bankers. A story which is mad enough even to attract the attentions of the Star. Those were your front pages. So we will start with the front page of the Telegraph, Josh, and the story which is creating sparks across GB News' floor.
Of the whole, hopefully the whole of this country, as well it should. NatWest boss under pressure over Farage bank scandal. So things have progressed. When Nigel Farage released to the public what was going on with the situation, the BBC, particularly is it Simon Jack, put out this thing basically saying that they'd been told by these sources from Coutts that that he didn't have enough money, essentially was the gist of it. And that was why he'd lost his account. Like, source... It turns out the night...
You need to have £1 million.
Yeah, and all of this stuff like that, even though loads of people didn't have £1 million and all this stuff.
Who would? You'd be insane to have that much.
Yeah, well, exactly. So it turns out that the NatWest boss, who owns Coutts, just happened to have dinner the night before with him. So,
like, not à deux.
No, sitting
event.
next to each other at an event.
At a function. But
and then suddenly a source close to the thing. So this is...
I put you next to me, son.
Yeah, exactly. Just fed it to him. He just uncritically just put out there whether he knew the real information or not. Didn't do his job as a journalist. I'm not a journalist, by the way. I just read what journalists say. So, so she's been criticised. She should be criticised for that. BBC needs to be criticised for not taking it further. And the only sort of light at the end of the tunnel seems to be that Rishi Sunak is actually will hopefully achieve something with this government because they're now putting this under review. There was already a financial investigation going on, and they're going to sort of tag onto that this whole the accounts now it'll be illegal for them to close people's accounts.
Because it does seem, doesn't it, Nick? Because this is like a really quite serious transgression. It's not another culture wars kind of blip. This is something pretty fundamental to a functioning democracy, that people cannot close down a bank account because you voted the wrong way. And he's not an extremist.
No, absolutely. It's absolutely shocking. And the fact that, as Josh says, that Simon Jack and other people like John Sopel, former BBC, now LBC, went along with it in such a cavalier way. It seemed very dodgy to me at the time, pretty obvious disinformation, whether deliberate or not, by the time it reached them, as Josh says. They just went with it. Oh, we didn't have enough money. They were just gloating. John Sopel's tweet is still up about that.
I just saw it now. I just checked before we came on.
There you go. Appalling.
Yeah.
And so it's absolutely shocking. And if you look at the dossier, I know we talked about this last night. I wasn't here, so I didn't get to talk about it. The fact they called Farage a disingenuous grifter. I mean, it was the language of an FBPE Twitter account. Yeah. And the most shocking part was, to me, was when they said this is not a political decision, but one centred around inclusivity and purpose, as if that's not a sort of woke-sounding political statement, as if they're either lying about why they did this Farage, or they were so entrenched in ideology that they couldn't tell that it was OK to have other views.
But they wanted desperately to present it as if he had accidentally exposed himself, like a buffoon, like somebody who posts a picture of a screenshot of their computer and leaves tentacle-torn tabs open or something.
You're just poor Farage.
He's obviously... And in reality, he's absolutely identified a significant problem that is like underneath the crust.
And we should thank Toby Young as well, because he did some of this work when he got debanked from PayPal. And it's just, as Josh says, the one good that could come from it is banks now may potentially lose their licences if they do this in future.
Let's hope so. We want to have a quick look at another story on the Telegraph. Bottom right, the EU calls Falklands Malvinas.
Yeah, Argentina claims diplomatic triumph over the Falklands. And this is an EU document that they put out, an agreed declaration with the EU and Latin American and Caribbean countries, where they refer to the Falklands as the Malvinas. The UK have said this is really out of order. I think it's out of order. It's not cool. It's not. And they're saying, oh, this is about respecting international law. Well, that's what it's called. It's the Falklands. 99-point-something% of the people who live in the Falklands voted to stay as part of the UK. So I think it's disgusting that they've done this.
And it's not some island that was settled, you know, and the original Argentinian population was squeezed out either.
We've had this since 1833, and also just the gleeful way that the EU is like, well, you're not part of us now, so we don't have to listen to you.
Could be exactly what the Tories need, though. Can we go over to the Express, Nick?
Yeah, Express has prices must drop now, inflation has fallen. So this is Jeremy Hunt saying that, look, inflation has gone down to 7.9%, guys, practically nothing. We've smashed it. He's calling this the first fruits of difficult decisions. What a great job. So now he's saying, of course, the savings must be passed on to the consumer, and whether they will, I don't know. He's saying shops, lower your prices. A bit like the banks where, you know, they're now getting these emails like, hey, your interest has gone up some pathetic tiny .nothing% because interest rates are up. So it's this constant thing of like, will it ever actually be passed on to the consumer?
Well, the thing about shops is decent grocery shops, at any rate, but big supermarkets, they work on very small margins anyway. They always do. They're not capable of, like, creating a what do you call it?
Buffer.
No, like a secret conspiracy. They're, like the OPEC thing, like a cartel. They're not. Yeah, exactly. They cannot do that. The prices will reflect the wholesale prices, the availability, the demand.
It depends on who blinks first, because if they're all keeping the prices a little bit higher. Yes, once someone blinks. But that's what I'm saying. The question is, how long is that going to take, and how much are we going to have to pay over the others? But this is actually...
It won't be as a result of Jeremy Hunt.
No, it won't be. But I want to say two things about this. First of all, this is good news, obviously. It's going down for people who are about to take out, renew their mortgages and whatnot. It means that it's unlikely that it looks like we're going to go to 6.25. It's going to still go to 6. But the other thing is, I just want to say here, is that the government is claiming responsibility for this. But as it says here, the ONS said that the cheaper fuel was the biggest cause, and that's got nothing to do with the government at all.
Absolutely, and in fact is in spite of their ridiculous policies on that front. George, you go to The Guardian now.
Yes, Tory MPs fear by-elections could leave government in death throes. There are 3 by-elections tomorrow. If they lose all 3, it would be the first time, I think, since 1968 that the government has lost 3 by-elections on the same day.
Right.
And they're all 3 very different by-elections or constituencies. Selby and has 20,000 majority at the last election. So if they lose, that's a massive swing, even bigger than New Labour got in '97. And you've obviously got Boris Johnson's old Uxbridge up as well. That's only a 7,000 majority. And then you also have, it looks like the Lib Dems are pretty much feeling pretty smug that they're going to win over the other one there, North Yorkshire. So. The question is, afterwards, what's the aftermath going to be? Because if they lose all 3, of course, then the Tories...
Well, it'll be obviously embarrassing, it'll be humiliating, but there's no question of a general election coming any earlier or anything like that. They will carry on. They have a huge majority, and it will be. I mean, but we all know that those, we've been watching the polling numbers. Do you think there's any surprises in it?
Not really. The only interesting part is that will this be the wake-up call for Sunak to see how out of touch he is with voters and how much anger there is towards the Conservatives from just about all quarters?
Could be interesting. We have 30 seconds to look at the Star. Have they got anything to add to the bank?
That's probably all we need. They've gone with complete and utter bankers, and they seem to be a day late onto the story that the Bank of England paid 25 million in bonuses to staff. They're calling it Plank of England Chiefs for a bit of colour. And basically, Andrew Bailey, he gets almost 500k, and he's talked about the need for restraint because of the wage price spiral, and yet he's handing out 25 million to staff is the angle.
Yeah, well, it's a decent angle, although, as you say, a bit late. That is it for part 1, but coming up we have Coots Are Mad, tilting at turbines, and attitudes that belong in a museum and are indeed found in a museum. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it. Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to Headliners with me, Simon Evans, with Josh Howie and Nick Dixon on the desk. So GB News continues to make the news, Josh. And if it's not my battle with service station parking franchises, it's our colleague Nigel being persecuted by the banks. Well, they'd say, we're going to go into that again now, by the look of it.
I think we did it really well.
I think we've done that, haven't we?
Yeah.
OK, let's move on. That one has been left in, obviously, from an earlier version of the show. Guardian, let's have a look at that instead, Nick. Ben Wallace, who is stepping down at the next election, says he can't imagine what it's like to have been hounded out of your job simply on account of your sexuality.
Yeah, this is Rishi Sunak apologises for past ban on LGBT people serving in military, and they're talking about the period from 1967 to 2000, where it was legal to be gay, but not in the military. So they're saying this was appalling and a failure of the British state and so on. And I do have some sympathy. Obviously, you know, this is important for some people, and you do think of the historic treatment earlier than this of people like Alan Turing, and it was pretty appalling.
Yeah.
The only caveat I'm going to say is I'm a bit sick of the constant looking back and apologising that we do in this country all the time. It's a bit like you go to therapy and you keep banging on about your childhood, where some pragmatic CBT might be more in order. And the only thing is, I'll just quickly add as well, it's quite ironic they're saying this is all appalling. We were you know, kicking people out just because of their sexuality and so on, and yet we're still doing it with the RAF saying useless white males.
Yeah,
so we're just choosing different groups to do it with.
That's the thing that struck me, really, is that we've just moved on into different things that seem to be persecuted or considered unacceptable. But they are talking about specific cases where people were not just legally eliminated from the recruitment possibilities, but were also treated badly as well.
Yeah, and people blackmailed and abused and whatnot, bullying, harassment. So this is have an apology. You acknowledge that there was a problem, and hopefully you move on and make things better. My only caveat I'm going to add to this is the constant LGBT. Maybe someone will correct me if there are any trans people who were persecuted during 1967 to 1990 or whatever, till 2000, but I don't believe so. They were persecuted for their sexuality. The T has got nothing to do with your sexuality. Why it's been constantly put in there. There's this, I saw a Twitter thread today, there's a news story that's happening in America where a young woman who's joined the army over there is complaining because she has 2 trans women, intact males, in her dorm, having to shower with them, and is now about to quit the army.
That is, I mean, I suppose, you know, and you know I'm broadly speaking on board with this, although, I mean, you could make the case that in the 80s and 90s, the argument against having gays and lesbians in the armed forces was that people felt unsafe in their dorms, their barracks or whatever, knowing that there were people who might be sexually attracted towards them, that they were expected to shower with. That kind of argument was made and is now been pretty much eliminated, and everyone's very comfortable about it. Maybe that's not a million miles from...
Well, the difference is here is we're talking about women who are physically weaker than men. That's a scientific fact. So to be housed and having showers with biological men, there's a reason why we have separation in the first place.
But there is a reason. But other people at the time also thought there was a reason that you didn't have gay men in the military because you would feel uncomfortable about being... I don't know. I'm just saying...
What Josh is saying is take women out of the army.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying put only women in the army. Is what I'm saying.
Telegraph now, Josh. Joni got it wrong. They did pave paradise and they did take down the trees, but they didn't put them in a tree museum.
Wow. That's a proper...
You don't remember that?
That's a proper...
great song. Yeah.
Don't always seem to go.
Very good. SNP admits to felling 16 million trees to develop wind farms. Now, I'm not against wind farms. They're a cheap way and they can provide a lot of electricity. 16 million trees, though, that's a lot of trees.
That's a lot of carbon capture, isn't it? Is the thing that we're all kind of obviously, you know, thinking, as well as the beauty.
Yeah, and the Forest Services are saying, and the wind farm, that there's compensatory planting elsewhere, but that hasn't been 100% confirmed. It just seems like an immense amount of trees. I can't sort of fathom that amount of space necessary. You sort of, for me, I just go, well, there's a tree, cut it down, and then you can put a wind turbine.
You probably need 10 trees all the way around it.
That's my scientific assessment of it.
I mean, they pack these trees in pretty tightly into the plantations. I don't know if these trees that were taken down were the ones that had been planted, you know, not very much earlier by Terry Wogan or something. I seem to remember planted a load of trees. But, I mean, it's a farming crop, right, these trees? This is not like old-growth forest or anything.
Well, I think they're worried that it's moving into that because their laws have been watered down so that they can now do unspoiled wild land, which is the proper stuff. The good wood.
Yeah. So. I mean, it's... Oh, God, the whole net zero thing, we come to it pretty much every evening, don't we? But it has obviously been, you know, poorly thought through in terms of how reliable it is. There's still the expectation that it's going to have to be supported by gas power stations and so on. Otherwise, you're going to have rolling blackouts every so often just because the wind dies down. It feels like there's a whole cluster of reasons that we may just have gone a bit too soon with this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm against it, obviously. I mean, it's because it sounds like the kind of thing... It's a sort of central planning of, like, oh, we need wind farms, but we go against the kind of Scrutonian preservation of forestry, which is where I would land.
That would always, you know, be the casting vote. Would just how does it feel in your gut?
Yeah, exactly.
To take down 16 million trees to put up something that's probably a very short-term solution.
Destroying nature to save nature. There's a contradiction there.
But I suppose the alternative is to put it out in the sea, and then, of course, you... well, there's probably some bad reason. Anyway.
Seaweed.
Yeah. Walruses. Independent, not in my back, walrus. Independent now, Nick. And a sickness explosion, which is a statistical rather than projectile vomiting type of thing, I think. Is that right?
Yes, I see what you mean. Yes, it's more of a metaphorical explosion in this case. Sickness explosion in the UK costing billions per year. And what this is a report from the King's Fund think tank and the former Labour Minister, Lord Filkin. And as you'd expect from the Independent and a Labour Minister, it's a bit short on answers. So it talks about our levels of obesity, excessive drinking and large health inequalities in this country. But it doesn't really tell me what they're going to do about it. It says the NHS can't solve it. But then you get to the answer. What's the answer? Oh, lo and behold, it's more taxes. So it's very left the answer. It's tax and regulation to encourage healthy behaviour.
So the half a dozen people who are still working...
Yeah,
but I think it's taxing...
It's taxing sugar type of thing. I imagine. They're saying cross-government action, very vague, about quality housing, the air we breathe, and taxing people. So, although they've identified a problem, obesity and drinking, the solution seems a bit
So
vague
it's all minimum pricing for alcohol and all that sort of thing, and the soda tax. I mean, the argument against a lot of those is that they just hit the working classes, or indeed the underclass, you know, who rely on carbohydrates and booze to cheer themselves up a little bit.
To be fair, it's an incredibly hard problem to solve while you have the junk foods everywhere. And it also, something the left don't like, it depends on personal responsibility.
Is it not? Is there any sense that this is a pandemic or post-pandemic thing? I mean, not, you know, getting into...
No, this is something that's been brewing for years. They should have been on top of this, I would say a decade ago, maybe even 15 years ago, because it has been brewing. It's costing our economy like hundreds of millions, 15 billion. Yeah. And this is what and for me, the real number this was we cannot treat our way out of a public health crisis. It's not enough to say send in the NHS at the end to try and sort these things out. No, absolutely. This needs to be sorted out at a deeper level. I agree with you. They don't really get into it properly, how that's necessary, but they have high aims and good aims that are like to increase life expectancy by 5 years by 2035. That's not too long away at all.
No. Yeah.
And
I saw targets. I didn't see too many solutions at this stage.
Well, let's see. But
well, this is because the solutions that they tried of this kind, like bunging up the tax on sugary drinks and so on, they very mixed results.
Oh, really? I read a study that really worked. The sugar drinks one really did work, and now that forced over people going to non-sugary drinks now, and it's working. So
OK, all right. Well, I wish it well. Josh, museum news now in The Guardian for Roald Dahl aficionados, a tale of the long expected.
Yeah, Roald Dahl Museum acknowledges author's anti-Semitism. They have basically put a statement out on their website. They've put a display. There's a panel near the entrance of his museum. I'm a big fan of Roald Dahl, of his books. I've got all his books, read them to the kids. Not a fan of him as a person. He said some horrible thing about my people. But you have to separate the artist and the art. And at least when they're dead, I find it a lot easier. Kanye, I'm still not listening to. Yeah. And Wiley.
I mean, I think, you know, and we all have we discuss trigger warnings and so on, and it can get in the way. But if you're going to a museum, it seems a reasonable expectation that you want the picture of the full man, don't you? You want to understand all his flaws and faults.
And it's unpopular these days to separate the art from the artist, but I do also aim towards that. There's another Norwegian writer.
That's why you like him, though, isn't it?
You don't like the art. No, just the comments about Jewish people. Yeah, I love it. I read the non-fiction. But, if you think about Knut Hamsun, another Norwegian writer, he became a Nazi, or backed the Nazis, but he lived in his later life, but he lived till 92. But as you say, he wrote a seminal novel, Hunger. So is it worth it still? You know, you get the novel and then you get the stupid views later on.
And that's before you even get into Germany, where, I mean, if you wanted to kind of be a purist about which Germans, you know, emerged unblemished, there's an entire book by Clive James called Cultural Amnesia, which just pretends to be sort of marginalia from books he's read over the 20 or 30 years of his life, but is largely about how various artists, writers and poets and so on responded to the political crises of the middle 20th century. It's quite an interesting...
My friend bought me it. I haven't read it, but I have it on my shelf, which is more important.
It's an interesting subject in itself. You could almost do a whole, you know, PhD on it.
Did you think it was weird that the Royal Mint concluded that Roald Dahl was not regarded as an author of the highest reputation? Isn't that ridiculous? Isn't he the foremost children's author?
I would have thought he was. Although, I'll be honest, I don't like him that much, and it's not the anti-Semitism, although now I know I could go off on that. I just think he's very farmer-phobic. He always seems to have it in for people who try and run functioning farms and shoot foxes.
Wow, I've never heard of this particular new...
It's because he knows that plays well with the kids.
Farmer lives matter, OK?
Farmer lives matter, that's right. Big farmer. That's it for part 2. Coming up, trans collateral, a cure for my personality, and why women's football is statistically better than men's. See you in a couple of minutes.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. We have seen a few showers around today, some of those on the heavier side, but increasingly into this evening they will be easing out for many of us, and actually many of us seeing some late evening sunshine. The showers persisting for the longest though across the far northeast of Scotland, particularly across Shetland, where it is going to remain rather cloudy overnight with a brisk breeze, but elsewhere some clear intervals, and that will allow temperatures to fall off a touch more compared to recent nights, even down into single figures, particularly in some rural areas. But those clear spells mean that we'll start off with a fairly decent amount of sunshine first thing on Thursday, but increasingly into the afternoon, once again, we will start to see those showers bubbling up. Some of those could also turn onto the heavier side once again. They will be fairly well scattered, so there'll be some decent sunny, bright intervals in between, and in that sunshine, temperatures climb to highs around 18 to 24 degrees Celsius, around where they should be for the time of year. Into Friday, we somewhat do it all over again. There will be some sunshine first thing. Showers perhaps confined to northern areas to begin with, but increasingly into the afternoon, there is the potential that they do start pushing their way down into eastern counties of Lincolnshire and East Anglia as well. Always Shetland seeing the breeziest conditions through Friday, but into the weekend, more of us are going to start to see our winds increase as this area of low pressure starts to spread its way in from the west, turning much more widely unsettled for many of us, with plenty of rain to come into the weekend. Otherwise, enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to Headliner. So let's get straight to it. The Daily Mail have a story about pregnant trans men that reads exactly like the sort of thing someone would make up to make you hate them.
Yeah, that is about the size of it. This is fury over insane call to let pregnant trans men take testosterone despite risk to babies. And it's as bad as you think. And it starts with trans men, by the way, written as one word. Pregnant trans men. They sound like a kind of special rank of guards appointed by the king.
I am a transman for the county.
Exactly. It's bizarre. But anyway, a panel of experts, including shamefully 3 from Britain, said that basically you should be able to they prioritise taking testosterone over the effect on the baby. It's kind of like the people that.
So
tried to
this
say
is
that
just
smoking
because
was good for women.
People have confused images in their head sometimes. You use the terminology. So we're talking about female-born.
Right, they want to transition to being men.
Yeah.
They want to be pregnant, but they also want to take testosterone.
Yeah.
And those two things are at odds because it's very bad for the baby. It can cause genital development problems, causing incontinence and fertility. And these nuts sociologists, and of course they're sociologists, say that those concerns should take a back seat compared to the harms the trans men might experience. And they said both patients and providers need to pursue precautionary offspring-focused treatment approach. It's really bizarre. They said this ridiculous sentence. I'll just say this bit. These approaches reinscribe binarized notions of sex, resulting in social control in their attempts to safeguard against non-normative potential future outcomes for offspring. Absolute garbage basically means child abuse because
I mean, it is
you don't hurt the
literally
feelings of them.
If you wanted to create a parody of the gobbledygook, the verbiage, and also the indifference to the obvious moral priority, which is the health of the baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unbelievably disgusting. It's totally insane. There are debates about whether it's safe to have a glass of wine during someone's pregnancy. Taking this dangerous testosterone drug, and then they're sort of saying that it's more that gender-affirming care, i.e. the ego or the feelings of the biological woman, the mother, is more important than having a normal kid. And they're like, well, what is even a normal kid?
Yeah,
it's bonk. And
that literally is part of it. What even is?
Yeah, that's what they're trying to push through now.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't. Who cares even about the effect? And by the way, this was a £500,000 grant by a subsidiary of Britain's UK Research and Innovation. So £500,000 has gone to pay for this. Those people who put that grant should be fired.
Yeah, and these people should be in prison who are advocating.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Absolutely correct. Consensus. Josh, Daily Mail have a story of chips working as personality-altering device. And they certainly cheer me up, although I think a battered Savoy really to hit the spot.
I knew that was
you
going.
were thinking of that as well, Wendy.
So, UN warns brain chips like Elon Musk's Neuralink could be used as personality-altering weapons as FDA approves tech for human trials. So we knew that this human trials thing was already happening, but now there was a big United Nations panel, a bunch of very clever people all met up and said, there's a lot of danger here because it could literally affect our personalities. Now, he wants to... what Elon Musk is saying it's for, one of the things he said it can be used for is to help obesity. So I don't know if that'll be like the chip controls keeping your mouth shut or something. Yeah. But there are dangers...
Look the other way.
Yeah, well, exactly. But there are dangers. I think I don't know how I feel about Musk being at the forefront of this technology.
Neuralink stuff, just so that people are clear, I mean, what it's generally associated with is people losing limbs and so on, having a mechanical arm which they can then use just by thinking of, just like it was your own.
You can also control, like, the toaster or microwave, stuff like that. But I'm just worried if he's in control, then you're going to have to pay, like, $8.99 a month to be able to speak longer.
Yeah,
well, exactly. I mean,
4 slices.
Yeah, if everyone suddenly starts signing up to Twitter Blue, you'll know he's using it for ill. It's essentially mind control. That's the danger.
That is the perfectly plausible scenario, I think. Nick, a long read in the Telegraph about how flooding the market with university degrees has somehow not led to new enlightenment or a golden era of any other kind, in fact.
Yeah, we seem to talk about this a lot. It's how Tony Blair devalued the degree, and this is a long piece, as you say, by Noah Eastwood. And it's shocking. It comes from the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, and they admit that the UK has come to rely on the expansion of education to prop up economic growth. Yeah. And then their solution is that the sector be expanded further. That's the incredible part, from 53% of young people to 60%. I'm like, hang on, you've acknowledged that it's just a sort of fake economy, and so they want to increase it even more. But and it also, I mean, the Conservatives like Gavin Williamson have spoken out against this, but then, as they point out here, Conservative education policies haven't changed. They've actually met the Blair target. As my friend Carl likes to say, they're trapped in the Blairite paradigm. So it's this absurd idea that everyone should go to university, and that now they're facing legal action, of course, because of the stuff over the pandemic. There's also the sort of migrant visa scam where you bring over your dependents to do pointless degrees. So the whole thing's been pointless, it's unsustainable, and it was just a massive mistake from Blair.
Yeah, they don't mention anything to do with the migrant thing.
No, I threw that in.
Okay. I think it is fair to say that the universities in this country and education generally, I mean, I live in Brighton, it's full of foreign students during the summer, which is great, it's a big part of the economy. But that is becoming a big part of Britain's economy.
Well,
now,
they're saying
right?
even
Yeah.
more, so that's why English students are going to start losing out on spaces. Yeah. But it is a very interesting article. There's a few things that really stood out for me. One is it comes across like it's a Ponzi scheme. Essentially, it's added 200 billion to the economy, but it's costing students about 100 billion to... That students are paying for it, and they're also changing the laws now. So from anybody from 2023, used to be had 30 years and then your debt would be wiped off. Now it's 40 years. So essentially into your 60s, you're going to be paying it off.
Yeah.
Also, it starts at a lower threshold, 25 grand.
And
so,
it used to be like almost at zero interest, but that's
and that's gone up as well. It's like 9%. And then on top of that, and even with all of that, it's still they're paying universities paying £5,000 of a student's place on top of it. So even then, there's still financial holes in the system.
And we all know, you know, the stuff they learn is either worthless, completely, utterly useless, gender studies or whatever, or it's stuff that could be better done on the job.
Yeah, but they were also saying that there's been a move in the last few years to where you need a degree for even basic, nursing is not a basic job.
Well, because it's a demonstration
policing...
that you're reasonably intelligent. If you did an IQ test and another couple of tests to put you on the big five, conscientiousness and so on, and give you 6 months of funded, just like sex, drugs and rock and roll, which is what all young people basically go to college for anyway.
Yeah, get a job at GB News.
Absolutely. Josh, Telegraph now, it turns out women's football is actually superior. This is interesting.
It is interesting. Women's football proven to be more exciting to watch than men's. And this is a scientific analysis that has basically worked, just like with women's tennis, which is arguably better than men's tennis.
Arguably.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's more action on the court, where it's not all about the serve.
What do you mean by action? Carry on.
Okay. I was about to do something with my mouth, but I stopped. I stopped myself. This is the increasing popularity of women's football, but essentially they've broken it down that women actually take more chances. They're less afraid of getting injured, so they're passing more. They're less afraid of losing control of the ball. There's and so it's also there's
see a thing
less
recently.
fouls.
They'd created a new video. I think it was the French, Les Bleus, and they had the female players, and then they made them look like the male players. And you were like, oh, yeah, that's quite exciting. Oh, no, those were the women. I've been duped. Yeah. But the truth is, when you do actually watch a women's football match, you can tell it's being played at a lower pace and with less skill and impact and power, right?
Yeah, no, I have to completely debunk this article. They're saying that women are less risk-averse. No, it's that there's less risk in the women's game. If you give the ball to Man City, they punish you and they score goals. And that's it. It's like, at the highest level, they punish you for that. You don't get punished for it as much in the women's game, and it goes back and forth more.
Yes.
So it is like the tennis, in that the men's game, the serve is far more important. If you break serve, it's a massive deal, whereas in the women's game, you might just break back and it's not as big a deal. It's very similar.
I think you're right, but still, it's still growing. Let's give them a chance.
I'm not going to watch it.
Telegraph, Nick. And a statement about illustrated reverence from Dean of Canterbury, which I assume is a tattoo parlour of some sort, is it?
Yes, indeed. It's Dean of Canterbury defends appointment of tattooed priest. You've probably seen it on the old internet. Rev Dalrymple has been targeted by online trolls, and she was this person who I don't know if we have a picture, but she had the dog collar, the normal uniform, except with no sleeves, ostentatiously showing her tattoos in a way that seemed very strange.
That was the bit...
No, because you would never even seen a sleeveless version of this before, ever, even with non-tattooed arms. So... Josh is...
this is why people don't like
He's obviously got some sort of lock on his computer at home, so he's desperate. But look, the problem... She's saying she's been targeted. Other people are saying, look, this is... And she's part of something called Inclusive Church Network, which gets my woke radar up straight away. Basically, Simon, in conclusion, this is the problem with female priests.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is a slippery slope, isn't it? I don't know. How do you feel about it, Josh? Or do you have a bit of distance on the whole thing? But... Are there female rabbis now, by the way?
Yes, I had a female rabbi. She was wonderful.
Yeah. She could be tattooed, you can imagine that?
No tattoos. Jews were not allowed tattoos.
Oh, OK.
Not allowed to mark your body.
Is that
yeah, that's true, yeah.
That's all for part 3, but coming up in the final section, strange signals from outer space, strange fish on the beach, strange behaviour in the cotton shed. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here.
Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the final part of Headliners. Let's get to it. The Independent, Josh, and extraterrestrial radio signals that no one understands. Is this a Murdoch channel, do you think?
Shots fired.
Yeah, we've got to go for both of them now. It can't just be the BBC we take down this week.
A mysterious source has been sending radio signals to Earth from space for decades. Unexplained emissions have been happening for 35 years. And that's the end of the article. It's unexplained. No one knows what it is.
Well, there are some possibilities that don't quite pay. And pulsars are the most obvious one, I believe.
Everyone goes to the pulsars. That's such a hacky explanation.
Pulsar Deathline. It's a 90s
Is it a
post-punk
trope?
band.
Yeah. Is the pulsar a trope?
Yeah, it's a trope. It's not the... Yeah. But it's been regular, and they've looked back and they've found records of it going back, and they've only sort of recently identified the pattern, and then they've worked backwards and gone, whoa, we've been getting this stuff for years.
Yeah. So could it be anyone out there kind of thing? That's the point. Is it? Do you think it is?
Definitely aliens, right?
Yeah, it's confirmed. Says here.
Right, really?
I didn't read the second page.
That's where they would announce it. The third page of the Independent.
And now we need fans.
They place a small advert in the Independent. We are here.
There's no explanation at all, but it doesn't quite match up to any previously known.
No, it normally lasts for milliseconds
phenomena.
to several seconds. Now it lasts for a period of 21 minutes, which is a lot longer.
Yeah.
It's quite a big alien.
Vroom, vroom.
Yeah.
It's a newly discovered object named GPM J1839, which is also Elon Musk's new child.
Ah, very good. OK.
Nice, good joke about
managed
5
to
months
bring
ago.
two second-tier jokes out of that. Daily Mail, Nick, 10,000 maybe, 10-inch penis fish. 10-inch penis fish, that's the medium size.
I would send
Josh,
10,000.
honestly, going to need a cold shower by the end of this evening. They've washed up on a beach, presumably some sort of shipwrecked hen party.
You suddenly reminded me of the claims. I would send 10,000 penis fish. I would send 10,000. So it's thousands of 10-inch penis fish, which is the correct size, as we all know. Washed up on a beach. Photos already didn't happen.
British standard.
And fishermen, let's be serious, fishermen flock to shore to grab them all, as you do.
Yeah.
The grim-looking sea worms And of course, they're formerly known as Eurecis unis cinctus.
They're not a fish.
Between you and me. There they are. They're penis.
Oh, hey now!
And the important part, of course, they're greatly sought after in Asia for medicinal purposes, which doesn't surprise me really. But here's the key part, everyone.
Yeah.
They are excellent bait, particularly when fishing for sea bass or for vagina fish.
But they're 10 inches. That wouldn't be the
thing is, for me, it's quite unnerving because they're not circumcised.
Oh, yeah, that's almost anti-Semitic, really. They're also known as the fat innkeeper worm, which is...
Speak for yourself.
Yeah. I've been called on Twitter a few times. So, yeah, and it's in Argentina. I believe probably this... there's a little bit here that says Messi is actually eating these, and that's why he's so good at football. He eats hundreds of these.
Amino acids.
No, I've made that up, but I had to throw something
He plays in America now, doesn't he?
But he gets these sourced and sent to him.
This could be why...
I demand 100 penis fish in my rider.
OK. Is this nothing to do with the Malvinas again, though? This is nothing to do with them claiming the full...
No, they just want those 10-inch penises.
The Malvinas.
Dear. Sorry.
Daily Mail, Josh. Can we get away from the groin here? Scientists are finally coming to confront the inevitable consequences of space tourism. Probably not, by the sound of it.
Yes, sex in space. Scientists call for urgent research on the consequences of joining the Kármán Line Club, which is 62 miles above the Earth.
OK.
Something like that, 62
like
kilometres.
the mile height.
Yeah, exactly. Above sea level, which is where space technically begins. Because they're saying now, because you've got, like, Virgin, ironically named Atlantic, or the space thing, they're now, even though they're only up, I think, in space technically for like a minute and a half, which I could do, to be fair.
I think that would probably suffice.
So they're basically saying we better do some research now. There's no one's officially ever had sex in space. But what I didn't realise, they said it's actually quite difficult to get an erection in space because, of course, gravity doesn't work properly.
Yeah,
I've never found gravity. I've never been conscious that gravity was an important part of it. But is it?
Well, the blood rushes to the wrong part of the body. It rushes to your face and it gets like in your neck and stuff. And also, you can't remain in physical proximity because you can't rely on gravity to push people together.
Yeah.
So you can imagine.
You have to actually.
You've seen when they walk on the moon.
So you can't do that thing where you just sort of flop on. It wasn't me. It was
Sunday morning.
Gravity. But the old cinema.
But there is definitely a NASA file somewhere of some astronaut talking about erections and how they got it, and like they must have done it.
I really hope it's not Neil Armstrong.
What, really?
Like
you would prefer Buzz?
Hero, yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, Buzz is okay. But I don't care about aliens. I want to read this file about erection frequency in the NASA space station.
Guardian now, Nick, and we knew it had to come. The first trans star has been discovered.
Yes, another brutally boring space story. So this is the two-faced star with helium and hydrogen sides. Baffles astronomers and me. It's the white dwarf nicknamed Janus because, of course, it's two-faced, and the surface of it completely changes from one side to the other. And they've shown these observations to people, and they're blown away because they're nerds. But I don't really understand it.
Well, it seems to be made of two significantly different gases, and I suppose there must be. It's probably like the Indian and the Atlantic Ocean or something. There must be a sort of mingling somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, exactly. It's as they transform, and normally this takes place under the surface, but this is taking place because it might have a different gravitational area. It's sort of that's why it's doing it in a slightly weird way. But the planet is called ZTF J203349.
Elon Musk's child, yeah.
That's where it is.
Penis fish.
I like the way that it said. It did say that Janus. It referred to her or him as being trans in the article.
Did it really?
Yeah. It said the transitional god or something.
Oh my gosh.
Not just two-faced. Anyway, as in January, obviously. January, finally, Josh. Daily Star. I'm not saying I warned you this would happen if we liberalised marriage laws, but still.
Well, this is it. Someone pooed on the floor at our wedding, so we made guests take lie detector tests. This is Helen and Karen Whitehouse, or I don't know what name they took, and they got married in 2018.
Yeah.
They went down to the toilet. Now, I thought when I read this initially, it was like someone had done it on the dance floor.
No.
Or something. No. Someone had just missed the toilet. Missed the toilet.
Yeah.
That's not a mystery. That's someone just being a bit too drunk or whatever.
Yeah.
But they basically went back after their wedding and they drew up the list and they were trying to guess who it was, and they actually went and made a podcast out of it and interviewed those people and did lie detector tests, and they never found the culprit.
And it's become a story because the podcast has become the latest true crime sensation, which people love these things.
What's amazing, they said for a long time Henk was the prime suspect because he was hanging out near the Ladies' Loos and cleared it up, so he thought it might be him. Of course it's him.
Of course it's him.
He's hanging around the Ladies' going to clear it? Who else would clean it up?
I don't know. Yeah, it's very...
It's Henk.
That's
Henk or Hank?
Henk.
It's the killing, isn't it? It's the same plot as The Killing, exactly the person you assume it's going to be. The show is nearly over. Let's take another quick look at Thursday's front pages. The Telegraph. NatWest boss under pressure over Farage bank scandal. The Express. Prices must drop now. Inflation has fallen. Guardian. Tory MPs fear by-elections could leave government in death throes. The Times. Banks told to respect free speech. Daily Mail, new law to curb banks that shut down your account. And finally, the Daily Star, complete and utter bankers. Those were your front pages. A lot of banking news. That's all we have time for. Thank you to my guests, Nick Dixon and Josh Howie. I'll be back tomorrow with Nick and Lewis Schaefer. If you're watching at 5 a.m, stay tuned for breakfast. Otherwise, thank you for staying with us and sleep well. Good night.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. We have seen a few showers around today, some of those on the heavier side, but increasingly into this evening they will be easing out for many of us, and actually many of us seeing some late evening sunshine. The showers persisting for the longest though across the far northeast of Scotland, particularly across Shetland, where it is going to remain rather cloudy overnight with a brisk breeze, but elsewhere some clear intervals, and that will allow temperatures to fall off a touch more compared to recent nights, even down into single figures, particularly in some rural areas. But those clear spells mean that we'll start off with a fairly decent amount of sunshine first thing on Thursday, but increasingly into the afternoon, once again, we will start to see those showers bubbling up. Some of those could also turn onto the heavier side once again. They will be fairly well scattered, so there'll be some decent sunny, bright intervals in between, and in that sunshine, temperatures climb to highs around 18 to 24 degrees Celsius, around where they should be for the time of year. Into Friday, we somewhat do it all over again. There will be some sunshine first thing. Showers perhaps confined to northern areas to begin with, but increasingly into the afternoon, there is the potential that they do start pushing their way down into eastern counties of Lincolnshire and East Anglia as well. Always Shetland seeing the breeziest conditions through Friday, but into the weekend, more of us are going to start to see our winds increase as this area of low pressure starts to spread its way in from the west, turning much more widely unsettled for many of us, with plenty of rain to come into the weekend. Otherwise, enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel. Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, a very big reaction to Coutts closing down my bank accounts and the reasons given. And I have to say, it's been amazing to see everybody from the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to Elon Musk getting involved and having a say. But we're not going to rest here. No, what we need to do is get together the thousands of people who have been treated so appallingly by our bailed out banks and fight back. More of that and how to do it in just a moment. But first, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight is that the Prime Minister says no one should have their bank account closed for exercising their right to free speech. The matter was raised in Prime Minister's questions today in the House of Commons by David Davis. He described the closure of GB News presenter Nigel Farage's bank account by the exclusive bank Coutts as vindictive, irresponsible and undemocratic. Rishi Sunak was asked if the government would need UK banks to inform the Treasury about all the accounts they've closed for non-commercial reasons over the last decade. Rishi Sunak told MPs the rules are being reviewed. More on that in Nigel's programme next. Now, also in the news, Tata, the owner of Jaguar Land Rover, is set to create at least 4,000 jobs in the UK through a new electric car battery plant. The £4 billion gigafactory, as it's going to be known, is expected to be built in Somerset. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says it'll also lead to thousands more jobs in the supply chain, although it's understood the factory will be backed by significant government subsidies amounting to hundreds of millions of pounds. He added that it wasn't just taxpayer money that enticed Tata to invest in the UK.
When I was Chancellor, I set up something called the Automotive Transformation Fund, which was always there to provide targeted investment in strategic industries where we thought it would make sense. But what is crucial about an investment like this is it's not just going to be about that. It's going to be, as I said, about the quality of the workforce that we have here, the quality of our infrastructure, the road and rail connections, the approach to regulation, the competitiveness of our tax regime, which we have changed to make it more attractive for businesses to invest.
Inflation has fallen today, but the Chancellor says the government isn't complacent about the current cost of living and says he understands people are worried about rising costs. Jeremy Hunt was responding to the latest inflation figures, which have fallen faster than expected in the year to June. Inflation now stands at 7.9%. Last month, it was 8.7%. The Office for National Statistics says the fall may ease pressure on the Bank of England, which had been expected to raise interest rates next month. And lastly, in the United States, the former President Donald Trump has lost his bid for a new trial after the verdict that found him liable for sexually abusing and defaming a celebrated writer. E. Jean Carroll won the lawsuit and was awarded more than £3.8 million in damages. Trump had argued awarding her with more than £1.5 million in compensatory damages for sexual assault was excessive, because the jury had found he had not raped her, and the defamation was therefore based on pure speculation. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, there was a very big reaction overnight to the news that Coutts had closed my accounts, but more importantly, the reasons for doing so, which I got as a result of a data subject access request. Daily Telegraph splashed this on their front page today in quite a big way. Banks act Farage as he doesn't align with our values. The Daily Mail front page was in many ways even stronger. Top bank lied over Farage ban, and this was the briefing. This was the briefing that they'd given, that my accounts had been closed because my amount of money in the account had fallen below a certain level. Absolutely not true if you look at the minutes of the meeting of the 17th of November last year when they decided I would be exited. They said at the same time I was commercially viable. Well, unsurprisingly, this reached its way to Prime Minister's questions, with Jacob Rees-Mogg saying this. Right, we've lost the sound on that, which is a great shame. And here's what David Davis had to say and Rishi Sunak's reply.
The Prime Minister, back to the question raised quite rightly by my honourable friend, the member for North East Somerset. The opposition politician he was referring to, of course, was Nigel Farage, whose bank account was closed, not because he was a PEP, not because of commercial reasons, but because his views did not align with the values of Coutts Bank. A thinly veiled political discrimination, a vindictive, irresponsible and undemocratic action. But in addition, NatWest also disclosed confidential details about Farage's account to the BBC and lied about the commercial viability of his account, actions which ought to jeopardise his banking licence and should certainly worry NatWest's 19 million other customers. So he's told us what he's going to do for the future, but there are many other people in this circumstance. So can he require every bank with a British banking licence to inform the Treasury of all the accounts they've shut down for non-commercial reasons the last decade?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that the honourable gentleman has spoken to the Chancellor about this particular issue, and I know he'll continue to have those conversations. In the short term, having consulted on the payment service regulations, we do intend to crack down on this practice by toughening the rules around account closures. But in the meantime, the Financial Ombudsman Service is available for people to make complaints to, but I look forward to continuing the dialogue with him, as indeed does the Chancellor.
Well, that was Rishi Sunak's advice. Go to the Financial Ombudsman, and that's a point I'm going to bring up with Danny Kruger a bit later in the show. But he clearly, within a couple of hours, decided, and this is the tweet that the Prime Minister put out. He said, "This is wrong. No one should be barred from using basic services for their political views." And interestingly, you'll see with this that Elon Musk added to the tweet saying, "Hear, hear." Musk, of course, a great defender of free speech. Now, Grant Shapps and I have never agreed on, well, anything really, over the years. He's been a Remainer and completely the opposite view to me on most things. We've never been uncivil with each other, but we've never agreed or been on the same side until this morning on GB News.
It cannot be right that when people choose to go into public service, and regardless of their views, and I'd say I don't have to agree with Nigel Farage's views or Labour politicians' views or whoever, that is not the point. The point is people should be able to get banked, and there is no excuse for the banks not allowing those bank accounts to remain open. And by the way, often to refuse to open them in the first place. So the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, have a big role in this. Guidance for them was already changed in 2017. It's clear it's not working. And that is what I think this latest fuss will help resolve. And I know that Andrew Griffiths, who, Minister, you may want to get on the programme, will be explaining to Parliament the further measures that will be taken.
So strong stuff there, really, from Grant Shapps. But Suella Braverman went even further with a tweet. She said, "The Coutts scandal exposes the sinister nature of much of the diversity, equality and inclusion industry. Apparently anyone who wants to control our borders and stop the boats can be branded xenophobic and have their bank accounts closed in the name of inclusivity. NatWest and other corporates who have naively adopted this politically biased dogma need a major rethink. This is also an issue for the public sector too, which is why I'm reviewing our policies at the Home Office." Well, I know where, fairly and squarely, Suella Braverman was aiming her language. You see, Coutts is a relatively small bank. It's a bank for the rich. It's a bank for the famous. And perhaps in my case now, a bank for the infamous as well. But the real boss of all of this is NatWest. NatWest, part of the RBS group, but they really are the parent company. And the boss of NatWest is Dame Alison Rose. Now, The Telegraph wrote a piece today, and we've seen some of this stuff before about her, but they wrote a piece today, Dame Alison Rose, the bank boss who steered Coutts' diversity drive, the chief executive of NatWest, has overseen a pivot towards saving the planet and LGBT rights since taking the helm. Well, we sent our producer, Joe Casper, to NatWest HQ today to try and get some reaction down there. And he asked a simple question: should anyone's bank account be closed down over political views like mine? Have a listen.
No way. No way. No.
Sorry.
It would be a mistake to close accounts on the basis of people's political views.
It's a funny one, really, isn't it?
No. I'm not sure. I don't know enough.
No. No.
Not interested, sorry, pal.
Absolutely not, no.
It's like people should be offered, like, you know, basic services, regardless of their, like, political opinions or their colours, or, you know, it's just a discrimination. It's a basic things to live. Well, hopefully it doesn't have just one account.
Yes. Why?
Because Nigel Farage is a
I think it's terrible, if that's true.
I don't know.
I don't know, mate. I've got to get to work.
I think we're all entitled to our own views, but it depends on what those views are, how radical are you going?
Well, Nigel Farage had his bank account shut down by NatWest because they thought he was a race.
Exceptional case, I agree with that.
You do agree with that?
Yes.
Why?
Because I just can't bear the man.
Why? What is there anything in particular that you disagree with?
His racist views. I'm trying to be balanced, but unfortunately, when it comes to him, I can't be.
Well, lots of strong views on the streets there, but of course a vast majority for common sense. Now, it is no wonder that Suella said what she said, because under Alison Rose, we've got this extraordinary situation in NatWest where staff are allowed to identify as men and women on different days as a part of a series of LGBT-friendly measures. And if you identify as non-binary, you've got a double-sided lanyard. So you can be a man one day and a woman the next day. Maybe that's what banks should be in the business for, I don't know. From most journalists and most outlets, we've seen common sense. One who hasn't come round is former BBC lifer John Sopel, now who's escaped to Global. And his original tweet said, "You must feel a bit of a Charlie if you're Nigel Farage and you claim that it's all an anti-establishment stitch-up, that your accounts have been closed, when it's just you're not rich enough for Coutts. I'm thinking of starting a GoFundMe page for Nigel to get him his bank account back." Well, you know, I said, "Hi, John. Who is the Charlie now? It looks like you for swallowing the Coutts PR spin. I look forward to your apology." And I've got to tell you, there has been absolutely none. The BBC have not themselves either covered themselves in glory. But generally, I want to say this. Of all the times in my career when I put my head over the parapet, I've never received such cross-party political support as I have over this. But we have to take this further. This is not just about me. I'm asking you, have you been cancelled? One little example that came in today, Mr. X from Norfolk said, "My bank NatWest recently sent me a letter threatening to close my accounts with them because they say I've been paying in large cash deposits. I've banked with NatWest for 40 years, and they know that my normal banking activity, including occasionally depositing cash with them, is. On phoning my personal account manager, who has been to my house to assess my wealth and saw that I'm a vintage motorcycle collector who sometimes sells a motorbike for cash, to ask what constitutes a large cash deposit, he wouldn't tell me. He also said that people who deal in cash are criminals, tax evaders and money launderers. I recently received an email from NatWest clarifying that the maximum I can deposit in cash is £3,000. This has been happening to thousands of innocent people as a result of bad regulation and over-compliance. And I please want all of you to give me examples of what you've done. Let's stand up and let's stand together against the way the banks are behaving. Please email me, farage@gbnews.com, and our strength will be our togetherness. And if I can lead people who haven't got a voice of their own, I'll be very, very honoured and privileged to do so. Now, I'm joined by Sir Rocco Forte, chairman of Rocco Forte Hotels. Rocco, your reaction to this story?
I think it's most disgraceful, one of the most disgraceful things that's ever happened in this country. I mean, it's like a totalitarian state. You don't have the right views, you're cashiered. And in this day and age, when it's almost impossible to operate without a bank account, to be excluded from having one is effectively you become a non-citizen. And it's completely unacceptable. And the good thing about it is it's given the matter a lot of publicity because, as you said, a lot of small people were finding themselves in that situation and weren't able to complain. Now they can, and hopefully the government is looking at it. But I hope the Prime Minister does take some action, because usually he just kicks things into touch and forgets about them for a few months and a few years.
You're right. There could be an element of self-interest here, though, couldn't there? Because if Labour are going to be in next year, they might think, oh, gosh, maybe we'll start getting penalised by some of these rules. I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think something might happen. But, Rocco, your point, about businesses, small businesses, men and women, particularly those dealing in cash, whether you're running a fish stall or you're a window cleaner or whatever it is, the banks do not want to take cash anymore, do they?
No, but I mean, this is sort of a government drive to create a cashless society, which then enables them to monitor us much more carefully than they are up to now. And there are some transactions in cash, and you can't possibly avoid that. And obviously, with small businesses, they do take cash and have to take cash. So if you're not able to open a bank account, what else do you do?
What else can you do? Well, as a channel, GB News have launched a Don't Kill Cash campaign. We've got 220,000 people that have signed our petition because, like you, my fear is if everything's digitised, they can control how we spend our money.
And what we spend it on.
And what we spend it on. No, I'm genuinely worried about this too. A thought about business, Rocco. You have said quite famously recently that we become an anti-competitive country. Is it any wonder that people are leaving? But the banks are at the heart of this, aren't they? Because one of the other problems I hear from small businesses that want to set up is it can take them months to get bank accounts set up. I mean, we're becoming uncompetitive even through banking, aren't we?
Yes, well, that's what I hear. And I hear quite a lot from Italians who want to open businesses up in England, and they find it almost impossible to set up a bank account. And if we're supposed to be encouraging people to come and invest in this country and open business in this country, they can't open a bank account, they can't start a business.
How is it, final thought on all of this, Rocco, how is it, after 13 years of Conservative government, that we've become such a bad place to do business?
Yeah, but I mean, the Conservatives adopted and encourage actually the work agenda, which is these are the views that we are supposed to subscribe to, and which have become the mainstream. It's a minority view in the country. It's not the view of the majority of people. And Brexit was an opportunity. It's not been taken advantage. This government could be saying what they're going to do about Brexit, how they're going to make it work for the country. They're afraid of upsetting the European Union, who's busy upsetting us at every opportunity.
As a man that supported the Conservatives, quite generously over a long period of time, you sound very disappointed.
Yes, I am. I've never been so depressed about this country since the 70s. And then Mrs. Thatcher came along and changed everything when everybody said it's impossible. The Treasury's run this country, and more recently the OBR. Nothing can happen with the OBR's agreement. And there are a bunch of lefties taken out of Ed Miliband's think tank when it was set up by George Osborne. And they're continuing with the same policy, which has delivered subpar growth. And there doesn't seem to be any way out. And Liz Truss actually had the right ideas. She'd be first to admit she didn't go about it quite the right way.
Yes.
But the ideas are right ideas and the ones that should be implemented.
Yep, she was playing all the right notes, just not necessarily in the right order, as the Eric Morecambe gag went. So, Rocco, absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Well, straight talking there from Rocco Forte. In a minute, I'm going to talk to Danny Kruger, who's on the Treasury Committee. I'm going to ask him, is the Ombudsman any cop? And is the government really, really going to act?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Well, I asked you, have you been cancelled? I'm inviting you, if you have, to join the fight back, to form our little army for what is right and decent. And already some very interesting responses coming in. Mavis via email says, I am a 77-year-old pensioner and banked with NatWest since I was 18. I receive what looks like a standard letter to customers that if they think I'm involved in a fraud or keep withdrawing a substantial amount of money or even deposit a large amount of money, they will close my accounts. There we are, Mavis. Clearly, they've got their eyes on you. Mike says via email, I own shops around the country giving me a regular monthly income. I have always paid my credit card off each month. I own my house outright, so no mortgage, yet for some reason, the bank has deemed me a risk and have reduced my credit card. I've got an answer for that in a moment, Mike, I really have. Jane via email says, we are a small international business that has been investigated by our bank on the hunt for money laundering. After 9 months, we were grandly informed that we were okay. However, earlier this year, my husband received an SMS just saying that they were closing down an account. There was no indication of which account they were closing down, as we had several with them. And Neil, finally via email, says, over the past 6 months, we were having problems with our charity account. The bank threatened several times again to close our account, so we decided to remove the money and look for somewhere else to put it. Folks, 2 months ago, I didn't even know what a subject access request was. I didn't know that it was possible to get out of the banks personal information that pertained to me. Now I do, and it's because I got that back that I was able to validate my story to show that I was telling the truth and that the other side weren't. Any of you in this position, please put your complaints into the banks. Put in data, subject, access requests and find out what personal information they have on you and why they've acted in this way. Please don't just nod, do it. Now, I'm joined by Danny Kruger, Member of Parliament for Devizes and member of the Treasury Committee. Crucially, Danny, welcome to the programme. David Davis's intervention earlier on, I mean, kind of questioning whether NatWest deserved a banking licence. It was strong stuff. And the Prime Minister responded by saying that those that have a complaint, such as our viewers who've just, just emailed in, should go to the Financial Ombudsman. But here's a problem. A friend of mine had his Coutts account closed after 15 years. He'd been a city trader, he'd been a high earner, perhaps not earning quite as much now as he was in the old days. So he'd been a long-term customer of Coutts, gets a summary letter, such as I had, closing him down, and so he writes to the Ombudsman 15 months ago. Yeah. He's still emailing. He was promised within 6 months an answer, but 15 months on, he's still emailing the Ombudsman. Should I take Rishi Sunak's advice?
Well, we need to do more than that, clearly. And first, let me say what a public service you've performed, Nigel, by bringing this to the public attention. I didn't understand anything about this before. Now we do. And it helps explain what's been going on for me as well. I'm the co-chair of a new group of Conservative MPs. We call ourselves the New Conservatives. Yep. It's all about the post-2019 voter coalition. We're trying to open a bank account. We're being sent from bank to bank. Are you? So, struggling to do so. I hope we'll get there. Trying with NatWest at the moment. So, so we'll see. There clearly is a problem. I mean, the good news is, and this all started a year ago. Do you remember the PayPal business? PayPal closed down the accounts of Free Speech Union, Us for Them, anti-lockdown, free speech organisations. I raised that in Parliament. It is now a year ago. The government has responded, and what we heard today is that, probably in light of what's been going on with you and others, of course, there's a whole host of others, as you know. They are going to initiate changes to the way the Ombudsman works. And you're right about the bureaucracy, but just quickly, let me just finish what they're going to do. They're going to say that it's not just about whether you've been treated fairly, because what does that mean? They could decide you've been treated fairly. Sure. They're going to insist that fairness means free speech. So you cannot be debanked on the grounds of your lawful right to free speech. I am thrilled to hear that. But I want to ask you, Danny Kruger, as somebody on the Treasury Committee, how have you allowed the Ombudsman to be this lax? Well, and that is a responsibility for you on that committee. Well, fair challenge. Of course, ultimately they're regulated by the government and we're Parliament. We had the Financial Conduct Authority in today, and I was pushing them on this. I was slightly mollified by their answers. What they said very clearly is there is no grounds on which an individual can be debanked because of their political opinions. They said that with absolute clarity. Did they? So, and what we're waiting for now is this further regulation that will insist on the Ombudsman that anyone who's handling payments will not be able to remove somebody's account on the basis of their lawful expression of free speech. So Andrew Griffith, who is the Treasury Minister responsible... Who seems very sincere, by the way. He's absolutely right, and he's been talking to a number of... I don't know if he's spoken... I think he has spoken to you personally. He's spoken to others, including people I've connected him with, people who've been the victim of this. As you were saying earlier, it's a sort of weird combination of bureaucracy. I mean, all the problems that your listeners are just describing there, it's sort of algorithms, it's computer says no, it's just a sort of systems rather than humanity. But it's also this kind of culture of thinking that there are certain opinions that are, that it's possible to disregard. Well, I'm delighted to hear the government say what it said, and if we can push through legislative changes on this and do it quickly, I'll be delighted. But there are other problems that exist within banking, and Rocco Forte and I touched on this. There is an attempt. I mean, let's face it, Rishi Sunak is pro us having central bank digital currencies. He's pro a completely cashless society where every transaction that we do can be monitored, we can be limited in what we spend. I'm terrified at the prospect, but we're moving towards a cashless society, hence the GB News campaign, Don't Kill Cash. But this is all because of insane anti-money laundering regulations, all of which came through the European Union into British law, are being over-interpreted. Forbes estimate that for every £1 recovered in laundered money, there's a compliance cost of 100 quid. I mean, so the whole thing is a sledgehammer to miss the nut. Can we, and I know it's difficult, because I get it, organised international crime,
people trafficking, drugs. I know there are huge amounts of money being laundered out there, but can we please revisit this legislation?
Well, I want to. So I've been campaigning against CBDC's, the digital currency as well. I mean, I think there might be a value for it in what's called wholesale banking, you know, transfers between banks. But when it comes to you and me, the idea that we should be able to have to give up the pound in your pocket and literally use this new digital pound that they're proposing. I mean, they need to make the case for it. They're consulting at the moment. I don't think we should say no, absolutely, because there might be some value. But I do want to say we've got to...
They're actually employing at the moment.
Well, we must not let them do away with cash. And again, Andrew Griffiths and others are insistent that we keep cash. So we have to absolutely do away with that and stop them trying to abolish cash. Because crucially, as you say, ultimately the technology will be there that they can track our payments. And what Justin Trudeau did in Canada to those truckers, you've seen it happen to you. They will do it to Brexiteers and they'll do it to ordinary people.
And
here
maybe
in the UK.
people buying one too many plane ticket because their carbon allowance has been used up.
They use their meat ration.
And that worries me. Right, now a final thought on this, and I think this is fundamental and important. We used to have the right to a bank account in this country. It disappeared with the privatisation of the post office. Neighbouring countries, such as France and Germany, you have an automatic right. You can have a bank account and your own business account if you want to start up in business. Can we do something about that?
Sounds like we should. It sounds like absolutely we should. We should. And we need to revive the local post office network as well, which has been a terrible tragedy, the loss of the post offices and the services that they provide to local people. So this is essential infrastructure and it's an essential right. You should be allowed to have a bank account that enables you to transact with people without anybody snooping on you. And as digital technology develops, we need to insist that the government doesn't exploit the power that it's going to have, as the Chinese do, as the Canadians do, and ensure that people remain free, because ultimately that is the basis of our prosperity.
Denny Kruger, I'm going to invite you back as a member of the Treasury Committee in a few weeks to report back on whether we've seen, obviously it'll be after the recess, but to report back, because I want to see action on this. I want to see it fast. And thank you for joining me on the programme. Now, I said earlier that I've never put my head over the parapet and received so much cross-party support. Yes, there are some people that can't stand me and think it's quite right that I should just be eradicated from society, but they are few in number. This is non-partisan. This crosses left and right. In a moment, I'm going to talk to somebody very much on the left, way to the left of me, way to the left of many people, but I'd be very, very fascinated to get his view. Up next, it's George Galloway.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I really believe I've lifted the lid on something very, very important here. People should not be closed out of society for holding legal personal views. I'm pleased that Rishi Sunak has acknowledged that and backed that. But this isn't about the Conservative Party. It isn't about those on the right of the spectrum. It isn't even about whether you're a Brexiteer or a Remainer. At least it shouldn't be. I'm joined now by George Galloway, former Labour Member of Parliament and leader of the Workers' Party of Britain and host of the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast. George, what's your reaction to this Coote story?
Well, not for the first time. You're really making the weather. The fact that from me to Andrew Neil, and now we're joined, buttressed by Rishi Sunak, a small buttress, but a buttress nonetheless. It's quite clear you're on the verge of yet another victory. So I take my hat off to you. It is a signal service that you have done. Look, Nigel, the idea of the banks, of all people, being the moral arbiter of value when they are the very same people and institutions that brought us to the brink of ruin and almost destroyed our economy, had to be saved by the taxpayer. And I hope you remind people that 40% of NatWest, the parent group of Coote, is still in public ownership. So they have an extra obligation to that obligation you just spoke about, the obligation to provide the opportunity for everyone to have a bank account. But of all people, to seek to impose a set of values, banker, seriously?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, NatWest, George, have 19 million customers. There is talk now of their being able, through AI and other tech tools, to monitor the social media comments of those 19 million customers. It seems that the drive towards censorship, I mean, do you believe this government will actually act and do something?
Not on the censorship front. I think there's an ironclad consensus across the front benches, across the so-called mainstream political parties, to keep as many people in as much of the dark about the truth as possible. And you can see why. Their own performance, their own views, their own
Right, we're losing George. We're losing George. Sadly, the sound went, but I think George very much in agreement there that it's just monstrous to close people down because they happen to have a particular opinion. Just simply monstrous. Now, the right to demonstrate, you know, it is something that we do genuinely believe in, but it has to have limits. And I have to say, with Just Stop Oil, it's going way, way too far. It's upsetting many, many more people who perhaps won't be attracted to their cause. Well, the What the Farage moment today, it happened in London, and this was a man who Johnny Bairstow rugby tackled, picked up and carried off the pitch at the second Test match in Lords, when this was one of the guys that was going on trying to cover the cricket pitch with this sort of orange dust that they seem to prefer. And that same man, because it's always the same people, over and over and over,